long have I waited for such a worthy challenge. I will savor this. And if this conflict brings about the end of my life, I will savor it all the more.
Hey everyone, I'm Deegan and I'm a professional comic book artist and illustrator. And today, I'm going to be drawing an epic scene from Invincible Season 3, Episode 4 for you guys, where Battle Beast fights a Viltrumite executioner. Let's get into it. With every piece of art that I create, I always start by thinking about the overall composition and poses of the characters. You can see here I started by sketching some basic wireframes of Battle Beast and the Viltrumite executioner. That way I can kind of get an idea of the flow and overall layout of the piece as a whole. My process, especially in the comic book industry, is a little unorthodox. Most artists, after sketching their wireframes and base layout, will begin very roughly sketching the characters in pencil, and then will ink over that pencil sketch in black, refining their line work at that point. But I've found over the years that I don't really like having a rough sketch stage. I love jumping from my basic layout straight into my line work and refining the anatomy and poses of the characters. That's really the most fun for me. Here you can see that I started drawing Battle Beast's head and facial expression. I really wanted to emphasize this in the piece. For me, the focal point of this whole thing was going to be his facial expression. His main goal is to find worthy adversaries and a battle that truly fulfills him. So I wanted to emphasize the excitement that he has to fight a Viltrumite. He's practically salivating at the opportunity. And as you can see as well, I initially started by doing an open mouth, almost yelling expression. But I found that it wasn't conveying the emotion that I just talked about wanting to convey, so I scrapped that whole thing and started working on a more sinister, excited smile. I'm glad that I did, because this second expression that I drew was exactly what I was going for. I really took my time on all the details and little intricacies of his face, because again, I really wanted it to be the focal point. And then I moved on to the Viltrumite, refining his line work and anatomy and overall pose. He really is secondary to Battle Beast here, but even though he's not the focal point, I wanted to make sure that his pose and body language was still interesting and dynamic. I paid extra attention to the hands, because hands are always an amazing way to add life and excitement to a character's pose. It can really add a lot of expression to a piece. Now that I had the base bodies of my two characters drawn, I started focusing on drawing their clothes and armor on top of those base bodies. I really like to do it this way because then I feel like I make the clothing and armor look like it truly is fitting on top of the character, and I don't run the risk of anything being too small or not in the proper perspective. It really allows me to fit everything onto them properly. Drawing Battle Beast's armor onto his torso and lower body was especially difficult for me on this piece. With how much foreshortening I have in his pose, it made it really tough for me to get the curves and the lines of his suit to look correct and in proper perspective. So you can see that I erased and redrew them several times. I really wanted to get it right, so I just kept trying. Here you can see that I started erasing some of the underlying base body now that I had the costumes and armor drawn in. Now that I had the line work for Battle Beast and the Viltrumite executioner finished and locked in, I moved on to the coloring process. In the comic book industry, a lot of artists like myself will only do specific parts of the process. I, for example, will pencil and then ink a piece, and after I have drawn the black and white line work, I'll send it off to a professional colorist who will then color the artwork, at which point it's finished and ready for printing. It's not very often that I color my own art and don't work with a collaborator, but for this video we really wanted to show you guys a complete from start to finish process, so I came out of coloring retirement. I start by laying down flat base colors. After doing that, I can start to throw in the darker tones and where the shadows would fall depending on where I decided to place the light source. This is always a bit of a painstaking process for me. It's a lot of trial and error, throwing shadows on certain areas and seeing what works and what doesn't. This part is a little difficult to see on the video, but at this point I was working on Battle Beast's face and hair details. I really wanted to get a lot of tones and details in his face because again, I was looking at it as the focal point. Then I went in and added some details to his arms to show and convey that he's covered in fur. Now it was time to start throwing in the highlights. These are all the places on the characters where the light is most likely hitting most prominently, and therefore the lightest shades. Now I started throwing shadows and darker tones onto the Viltrumite. Believe it or not, he was a little bit more difficult for me simply because his color scheme is so simplistic. I wanted to make sure that he was still interesting visually and that the shadows gave everything dimension, but it was difficult because of how monochromatic he is. That's where adding highlights and things like that really help him pop. Here you can see me kind of messing with and tweaking the overall values of the darker and lighter tones, trying to figure out exactly how deep I wanted to go with them. Now that I had the colors for my two characters pretty well set, it was time to start figuring out what to do for the background. As you can see, I went through many different color combinations, special effects, ideas. I finally settled on a yellow and red gradient, and then I outlined both characters in a contrast in color to help them pop from the background a little bit more. Then I started adding in what we call in comics action lines. It's fairly self-explanatory, but it does what it implies, which is add movement, action, and make the piece feel more dynamic overall. Here I decided to change where the action lines were emanating from, the focal point from where they all are drawn to. By moving the action lines in their overall direction, I was able to better sell the movement and the idea that Battle Beast is really jumping at us. This was a pretty pivotal point in the process where I decided to zoom the camera in a little bit more. I felt like bringing us closer to the action as a viewer made everything a bit more exciting. And lastly, it wouldn't be Invincible without a little bit of the old red stuff. For any of us fans who have watched this fight, or any fight from Invincible for that matter, you know it is only a matter of time before someone or everyone is getting some blood on them. And from an artistic perspective, it's such an amazing way to add motion, contrast, and stakes to a scene. Having bits of splatter flying off the back of Battle Beast's hands and from the corners of his mouth just add that little extra punch and really make it feel like Invincible. And you can see adding in bright highlights really helps make it look like a liquid and gives it that shininess, again making it pop more. At this point, I was really in the home stretch and kind of just playing around with little tweaks, adding in bits and pieces here and there, and experimenting with tiny details. Really just trying to add as many bells and whistles as I could and experimenting, seeing what worked and what didn't. One of the things that worked was adding in some thicker line work on the sides of the characters that would be getting less direct lighting, as well as adding in what we call cross-hatching lines, just to help give more texture and vibrancy and life to the characters. At this point, after looking at it dozens of times, up, down, sideways, and until my eyes started to blur, I realized that I was incredibly happy with it and was about ready to call it completed. Thanks so much for watching me draw this fight from Invincible. You can watch seasons 1 through 3 of Invincible only on Prime Video. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the Prime Video YouTube channel for more videos like this. See ya.